Hello, and welcome to this NYSAC live briefing on the New York State Executive Budget Proposal for the state fiscal year that will begin April 1st, which we reference as SFY 2025. Today, we're joined by our very own budget expert, Dave Lucas, NYSAC's Director of Finance and Intergovernmental Affairs, and Ryan Gregoire, our Legislative Director. We are here today to provide a preliminary assessment of how this spending proposal could impact county governments. If you have questions along the way, feel free to put them in the comments section and we'll try to address them as we go. We'll also save time at the end to take other questions that you may have. Governor Hochul unveiled her executive budget proposal last week on Tuesday, January 16th. And the first major headline is that, on the whole, this budget doesn't spell bad news for counties. Given the state's challenging financial position right now, our top line request for Governor Hochul and the legislature this year was straightforward but crucial. Do no harm to county governments and local taxpayers. While there are some cuts, and we'll delve into them shortly, it's clear that Governor Hochul has heard us. This budget proposal largely preserves state aid to county governments and refrains from introducing significant new cost shifts, or new mandates as we call them. However, our work doesn't stop here. In fact, this is only the beginning. NYSAC is actively analyzing the budget language and regularly updating our county impact report, which can be found on www.nysac.org. And we've recently updated that and put that on our website. So as we get new information, we will post those updates. Again, this is a starting point. The end point is either April 1st, the beginning of the new fiscal year, or when they come up with a final budget resolution. So, Ryan, what happens? Can you tell our audience what happens between today, January 24th, Sure, and April 1st, or when they pass the final budget?
Yeah, when they pass the final budget, right. There's a lot that has to take place, Mark. 30-day amendments are due by the governor to the legislature on February 2nd. That is another opportunity that we have and everyone else out there has to weigh in and make some slight tweaks and adjustments to what the governor has proposed. So we're actively working on what's called a 30-day amendment request. That's going to be filed with the governor's office on February 6th, which is next week. NYSAC will be testifying before the joint budget committees on local government and finance to discuss the impacts to county governments from this year's budget. One House budget bills will be released in early March. That's when both the Senate and Assembly have an opportunity to introduce their priorities to the public, what folks are looking for. And then, of course, the budget is due on March 31st at 11:59 p.m. or thereabouts, depending on what kind of math and clocks you subscribe to.
Throughout that whole process, your NYSAC team will provide updates along the way about one House budget bills, what the priorities of the legislature are. We will publish our testimony before the state legislature. We have a legislative conference on February 26th, 27th, and 28th. Dave Lucas will be presenting the state budget analysis at a workshop there, and I think Ryan will be joining him for that. We'll be having lots of conversation during the NYSAC legislative conference about where we are in terms of the status of the state budget. So stay tuned. We'll continue to keep you updated. Your involvement at the local level and in Albany and insights are invaluable as we navigate through these details and prepare our advocacy materials through the rest of the budget negotiation process and through the 2024 legislative conference. So please, if you have questions along the way, we also recommend that you develop and talk with your state lawmakers about your budget priorities at your county level throughout between now and April 1st.
Yeah, just one thing on that, Mark, right, for the members to be aware of. Every state legislator has the ability to file member requests as part of the enacted budget. Those get negotiated at the very end of the day. So, to the extent that you have a local project that you need help funding, if you have a specific local issue that you need addressed, go to your state delegation because they really can, put in a request and help you. But you need to do it now so they have enough time to file that with their leadership.
That's right. Those are county by county specific requests. For our part, your association, we look at the budget in terms of how this spending plan proposal will impact all counties across the state. So now we're going to jump right into the details. Dave, can you set the scene for us, for our audience here, in terms of the state's financial picture and their updated financial plan?
Yeah, the going back a few years to the beginning of COVID, the state was projecting a 4-year, $70 billion deficit, and we've been going back and forth, gyrating to huge surpluses and to deficits again. And for the state fiscal year 2025 budget, just 6 months ago, the expectation was we were facing a $40 billion surplus almost. The revenues have improved a bit. State spending has been lower than anticipated. One of the core components of the lower spending is something counties are struggling with now, is the inability to fill vacant positions. You just can't find the people out there, having a lot of difficulty. So the improved revenue and the lower spending on the state side is lower that almost $40 billion deficit to about 20. So from the context of a $235 billion budget, $20 billion over 4 years is a very manageable number to hit. But it doesn't mean there's not going to be pain in that, because somebody has to make up that difference. And one of the biggest issues we've seen driving the budget deficit is super high spending over the last few years. Double-digit increases in major programs like Medicaid and K-12 education aid. Some of that was supplemented with federal dollars, but now that the federal dollars are gone, we have these elevated levels, and there's the expectation that those higher levels of spending will continue. The problem is the one-time revenue from the federal government's gone. So the other big issue on the Medicaid side, and we can talk about it more later too, is they've had all these proposals for cost containment, but they've never been able to deliver on them. And so the governor admitted this time when she introduced her budget that, well, we're off by $1.5 billion on our spending because caseload didn't drop like we anticipated. There's been years in the past where the governor didn't tell anybody they were running over budget until after the budget was negotiated and passed. So it's a little better to see it open, but we're seeing the same problems over and over again where the cost containment and caseload estimates just aren't on track, and they're really big programs, so they drive a lot of spending.
And as you all know, counties do have a role in the Medicaid program. So when we get into the details of that, Dave, I might ask you some questions about how that could potentially impact counties. So thank you, Dave, for the financial report. Ryan, the budget included one of our top priorities, which was changes to modernize the state's tax code in relation to vacation rentals, VRBO, Airbnb. Can you talk about what that proposal does?
Sure. So there's a couple components of this which are positive for counties. First and foremost, the governor's language includes a provision to allow VRBO, Airbnb, Booking.com, these vacation rental property companies, to collect sales tax, both for the city of New York, the 57 counties, and the state of New York. So that's a revenue generator for both the state and the counties. It also helps to level the playing field between your hotel operators because they're already doing that. Okay, so that's a big win for counties. The other components of this proposal include the collection of the mandatory $1.50 hotel fee for New York City. There is nothing in this proposal as far as requiring vacation rentals to be part of a statewide registry. That is exempt from this proposal. And I also want to note that industry does support the governor's proposal as included in her budget.
Great. Thanks for the update on that, Ryan. So we took about 45 seconds there to not talk about Medicaid. Now we're going to talk about Medicaid. Last year, the big story coming out of the budget was on the issue of Medicaid and a major cost shift to counties. The state's action to divert federal funds away from counties, which they did successfully, unfortunately. Dave, where are we today? What do we have in this budget on Medicaid?
Yeah, as I noted at the beginning, the biggest surprise in this budget is the tremendous growth that's being projected over what was projected a year ago. So last year at this time when the budget was introduced, the governor was anticipating 3.9% growth for state fiscal year 2024 and 3.1% growth in 2025. With these re-estimates and the proposals and the additional spending they want to do, we're now looking at 8.2% increase for the current year, 2024, which ends in a couple months, and then 13% growth in state fiscal year 2025. And the scary part is these numbers get worse in 26, 27, and 28, where they continue to grow at enormously high rates. And that's all in a 9-month period where not much happened other than the cost containment wasn't realized and their caseload projections were off. It's kind of strange, too, that even though they're facing a deficit out of the box before there's any actions, the state continues to expand the program even though they're in a deficit situation, which makes matters worse because they have to find more money to fill the hole they're in if they want to add new spending. So that's kind of where we are in Medicaid. It's not a pretty picture financially. Our biggest fear as counties, as payers for the program, is this is unsustainable. The governor said it in her speech. The budget director said it in her speech. And guess what? A lot of governors and budget directors before them said the same thing. It's unsustainable. It is now gobbling up 40% of the general fund spending. It's an enormous amount of money, and we pay a share of the bill. As soon as the state can't pay it anymore, they're going to turn to county taxpayers potentially to pay what they can't support because they're unable to control the costs in the program. And that's the biggest fear I think we should have as counties, and we should need to remind our legislators that this has got to get under control, or we're all going to have bigger problems.
A quick history of the Medicaid program in New York State. This started in the 60s, and the state of New York said, yes, we will adopt the federal government's Medicaid program, and they accepted 50% of the Medicaid program from the federal government. The state put in 25%, and at the state leaders at the time, they turned to counties to pick up the other 25%. So it was a 50%, 25-25 until 2005, when there was a growth cap on the local share of Medicaid, and then 2011 when there was a hard cap on the local Medicaid contributions. So we pay about $7.6 billion a year, counties in New York City, towards the state's Medicaid program. Dave, what are your concerns, again, going out years if the state can't afford to continue to pay this for county governments?
Yeah, our current cap is vulnerable to being increased. And even if they don't do it here, I mean, they could say, well, we're going to raise the cap to $8 billion. It's a little increase. They could always shift costs to us in another program. We pay a share of a lot of different state programs. We get reimbursements from the state to offset we pay 100% up front usually, and then we file claims to get reimbursement back. Any one of those programs could be adjusted to generate less spending for the state so they can grow a program using other tax resources, local tax resources. And that's the big issue there. And it's been a long story. The one benefit of those two caps, though, is we are realizing a lot of savings. Between the two caps, between 2005 and the 2011-12, and when it was fully implemented, we're probably paying about $7 billion a year less in Medicaid had those caps continued.
But the key here, Mark, is the part of the reason why we have those caps in place is because the state made a policy decision to implement a property tax cap. We would not be able to stay under that property tax cap under the current scheme of Medicaid right now. Yeah. And the way that program is growing, there is no way counties would be able to stay under the property tax cap.
So we appreciate the state's effort to cap the local contributions of Medicaid. We will continue to appreciate that. We'll continue to ask them to hold the line on that local Medicaid cap. So thank you very much. Another plug for the legislative conference. We have a workshop devoted in specifically to Medicaid. So if you're attending the Albany Legislative Conference for NYSAC, there's a great Medicaid workshop on the horizon. Ryan, the governor's proposal included funding for new partnerships with counties, including in safety, communications, and infrastructure. Can you explain what those are for our audience?
Yeah, this is a really neat new program, new pot of money for counties. There's $135 million included in the budget. 85 of that 135 is earmarked specifically for public safety communication upgrades. So think of your 911 centers, next gen 911 technology, the process to begin implementing a statewide EZNet. That money can be used for those functions. And then the other $50 million is for a new partnership program with counties on infrastructure grants related to site readiness. So think about if you have a parcel of property that you want to develop for housing, let's say, but you need to extend your sewer and water line another mile down the road, you can apply to the state and get a portion of funds through this new program. So as far as details on when are these funds going to be available, first they have to be included in the enacted budget, but those will be coming out, and NYSAC will keep our members updated as soon as we have information on how you can apply for those funds.
That's new funding and new partnerships between the state and county governments. So those are welcome news for us as we look to a final budget resolution. There's also some good news on EMS, emergency medical services. Ryan, you're quickly becoming the state's expert on local EMS. Can you explain what's going on in the state budget and how that might impact counties?
Yeah, so we could probably spend an entire hour on this topic, Mark, but just to stay high level for everyone here, NYSAC has brought together a coalition of a variety of providers in the field and our other municipal partners and associations here in New York to really come together and figure out how do we tackle this problem, right? We all know that there's a huge EMS shortage. We're sitting in an EMS crisis, frankly. Volunteerism is way down. The paid system isn't being paid enough. There are so many issues within the EMS system. I'm happy to report that Governor Hochul and her team have actually taken a very active role in trying to address this problem. So her budget includes a couple of provisions, one of which, though, will allow counties and municipalities at local discretion to work together to form joint taxing districts to cover gaps, or maybe in some situations to just have one system countywide that covers everyone. But there's some flexibility built into the governor's program in addressing this EMS crisis.
Great, thank you, and we appreciate that and all of your work on this, talking with the governor's staff and a bunch of lawmakers and their staff. So stay tuned.
I should note for everyone on today's live cast, we have a fact sheet on the EMS crisis talking about the governor's proposal, legislative proposals that are out there. Take a look at that. It's right on NYSAC's website under Issues Public Safety.
Another priority for county governments that really began last year and is taking shape with this budget is language addressing one of the top concerns with tax foreclosures, property tax foreclosures. Dave, can you tell the audience what the budget does for in-rem tax foreclosure process?
Yeah, the state is required under a decision from the Supreme Court that came out last May regarding in a tax foreclosure sale, if there's any surplus left over after the delinquent taxes are paid, plus penalties and interest and what the Supreme Court called reasonable administrative expenses, which remain undefined, we're going to have to adjust our state laws that have been in place for the last 30 years that manage this process. And we carry out that process on behalf of the school districts, the towns. We make them whole in this process. When there are delinquent taxes, those are turned over to counties. Then we're expected to pursue the collection of those, and we charge interest and do some other things in that process. So the state has created a bill here to redraft those proposals, and about half of the proposal is just dealing with, how do you define surplus and how do you give it back to the individuals and the steps for that. I think we're generally in a pretty good place, or a decent place, with the governor on the way she set this proposal forward. She really targets addressing the Supreme Court decision and making sure surplus goes back, and we have an organized process to do that. It doesn't go and try to rewrite Article 11, the existing foreclosure laws. It just targets that one thing, and we can save other things for the future. I know the legislature has other ideas in place that don't have to necessarily do with the Hennepin decision, the Supreme Court decision. It's not a perfect draft. We're going to submit a 30-day amendments on that to get it there. There's one other thing that's going to have to occur in this process. It's not insignificant how much money gets turned over to counties to collect. The last year we have good accounting data for that's available on the internet through the state comptroller's office is 2022. And in that year, about $450 million in delinquent taxes. Those are people that didn't pay their tax bill, their property tax bill, by the end of the collection period for the school district or the town or even the village, because we make the villages whole too, was turned over to the county, and then we would pursue collection. The thing is, this process takes years to roll out. It takes 2 years before any foreclosure action occurs of not paying taxes. That whole period of time, the county's making the school district whole for any taxes that were not paid. So when they're turning over $400 million every year, I mean, we have this rolling, taking in new taxes that we have to pursue, and then we're collecting parts of that back. So there's a lot of overlap in the system. But at the end of the day, when we lose that surplus, you're going to lose money on every property. There's no way to do better than break even, and there's going to be losses. So we also have accounts for uncollected taxes that we post, and that's over $100 million a year.
Right.
So those losses are going to grow for counties, and it's sort of something we're going to have to address, and we're going to seek some sort of financial assistance from the state to help us through this process as it gets all settled, as we start the new process and the courts weigh in, because there will be more litigation locally beyond what the Supreme Court said, go that way, but they didn't tell you exactly how to get there. So there's going to be more clarification through the courts. But we do like what the governor put in her proposal now, because it's an organized approach, and we think we can work with most of it.
Yeah, this is another issue, right? That we're on the ground, the counties are on the ground doing these in rem foreclosures. It's a very complicated process. And so, the federal Supreme Court decision impacts the state of New York, impacts the counties and how we do our day-to-day governance. So we are working closely. We asked the state lawmakers to understand what counties have to go through this process and work with us. There are a lot of stakeholders in this process, and we want to adhere to the Supreme Court ruling and continue to make it as simple as possible and understand the rights of the owners of those properties. Ryan, I'm turning to you again here. The migrant crisis has been an issue of concern for New York City and for members across the state. What does the budget do to address the migrant crisis?
Sure. So in this current fiscal year, which is last year's budget, the governor included $1.9 billion to help offset costs that the state of New York incurred, and also costs that the city of New York has incurred through the migrant crisis. She's increasing that allocation from 1.9 to 2.4, a $500 million increase in this budget as she's presented. So the state is assuming 100% of the cost of staffing and maintaining 4 different congregate sites for migrants in New York City, and they're expecting costs to continue to increase. The one thing that I want to say on the migrant crisis is the counties, New York City and New York State, have been talking in tandem and synchronization on this issue. We continue to urge the federal government to come to the table with not only funding resources, and the governor just sent a letter to the president yesterday in Congress asking for another $1 billion on this, but you've got to come up with some kind of comprehensive immigration reform. Otherwise, nothing's going to change. So we will continue to work with our partners in New York City. We have continued to, we've been helping Mayor Adams throughout this process, and certainly will continue to do so.
Another federal issue that's impacting your county governments. Housing is another major concern for counties in New York, across the country. This budget proposal takes a different approach than the governor took last year in seeking to incentivize the addition of new housing in communities across the state. Dave, can you talk a little bit about what's going on with housing?
Sure. The governor's got currently a $25 billion multi-year program in place. That's not all cash, but some of it's tax incentives and other types of loan guarantees and things like that to help encourage the development of more housing. So she's trying to build upon what she offered last year. She's been doing executive orders throughout the year to do what she can administratively to encourage the development of housing. As Ryan mentioned, there's that $50 million pot that's going to be in this budget proposal for us, so we could help develop sites or make sites ready. There's other things she's proposing in this bill. She wants to do the extension of the 421A tax abatement in New York City, which went away almost 2 years now.
Yeah.
So they've seen quite a bit of reduction in the development of multi-unit housing in the city, so that they want something to come back that they can use to help facilitate that. And she's doing the carrot and stick approach a little bit too. So last year it was all stick pretty much. You do this, or you can't. This is the only way you can. You have to hit these housing goals. And clearly, the local governments below the county level that do a lot of zoning and planning, in addition to the countywide planning we do, we're just like, no, you can't come in here and just. It's a home rule issue. It's very nuanced locally about how to do this. So she's offering incentives that if you become a pro-housing community, and there's a way to get that certification at the state level by adjusting some of your local laws so you're more open to housing, you can access these funds. And a lot of these funds, there's $650 million of them set aside right now today through different programs, through different state agencies. You'll get priority access if you're one of these pro-housing communities to access those funds. Doesn't mean others won't be able to get in there, but it's sort of one of the carrots she's putting out there.
Yeah, and just for clarification, right, for the folks on today's feed here, most of those grants, the vast majority, are eligible for lower levels, below the county level, so cities, towns, villages. And the pro-housing community designation will be open for them. We're not sure, right, Dave, if that will be expanded upon for counties.
Yeah, I think some of the priorities or these requirements of that certification are functions that counties don't typically do. So
Right.
I'm not sure with any county, unless they're doing countywide zoning, would even be eligible to directly get certified. There has been discussion with the budget director about being a little bit flexible on how counties could utilize this process and play a role. So we're hoping that is something they will take into consideration as they move forward.
We have a couple of other issues that we're going to talk about. I want to remind you that if you have a question or a comment that you'd like to put or ask of us today, to put that in the comments section of Facebook. On the environmental side of the budget, the governor is proposing to provide an additional $250 million in clean water infrastructure funding, bringing the state's total investment to $5.25 billion since 2017. This includes $500 million for the EPF to support projects that work to mitigate the effects of climate change, improve agricultural resources, protect water sources, advance conservation efforts, and provide recreational opportunities. The executive budget includes the RAPID Act, which would create a one-stop shop for the environmental review and permitting of major renewable energy generation and electric transmission facilities under the auspices of the Office of Renewable Energy Siting and Electric Transmission, or ORS. The proposed budget had some big news on the shared services front, proposing to sunset the state matching funds for the county-wide shared services initiative. The executive budget ensures that matching fund applications for projects already implemented will be supported. After that, the ability to receive matching funds from the state for any savings will sunset. This is expected to save New York State $11 million in fiscal year 2025 and $20 million annually thereafter. We will include in our 30-day amendments a request that the governor sunset this after the 2024 fiscal year for counties, or calendar year for counties, goes through the process, because a number of counties have applied for or submitted their shared services application for the year 2024. So if those projects get implemented, we would like the state to provide matching funds for those, which would materialize in early 2025. So after that, as long as we know the sun is setting on this program and the counties are working towards those shared services program, that's our preference. In reaction to that, the State Department of Department of State Local Government Services is expanding to improve the Local Government Efficiency Grant Program. So we're doing away with the countywide shared services program, and the state is expanding the Government Efficiency Grant Program. The Local Government Efficiency Program provides technical assistance and grants for intermunicipal projects targeting shared services, cost savings, and the delivery of efficient quality services. The executive budget will increase planning grants from $12,500 to $100,000 per grant. And beginning in SFY 2025, the new maximum would be $20,000 for planning grants and $120,000 for implementation grants. There's also a shared services component of the spending plan proposal for cybersecurity. The governor adds $32.9 million to address the state's cyber risk remediation program. These funds will be used to support the continued build-out of the New York Security Operations Center. Used to be called the JSOC, now it is the NYSAC. It will expand shared service cyber efforts to the two largest municipalities within each county. And it will also expand funding for cyber protection tools to include attack surface management, or AMS, which identify internet-facing computers and analyze their vulnerability to being breached. So that's a state-level program, and they're going to share those services with counties and the two largest municipalities in each county. Dave, there was some news on judicial issues with the governor proposing to raise the number of Supreme Court justices. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, this is a little bit of a sleeper issue. The number of Supreme Court justices is set in the state constitution as one Supreme Court judge for every 50,000 population. And that was set a long time ago. So the idea is to lower that to 30,000, which would probably, depending on our population at that point in time, would probably be about 270 new judges. The issue is, this would be a constitutional change, so it would require a referendum. The earliest this could get on the ballot is 2025. And the sleeper issue here for county government is that counties are responsible for the capital expenses of hosting the judges.
Right.
So not all these judges, you're not going to have one judge going to every county. They're, urban centers are probably going to get more. But the initial estimate, or the kind of ballpark figure we use for each justice to build out chambers, this is not courtroom space, this is just chambers for them to run their offices or as a judge, is about $1 million per judge. So 270 judges is a lot of money. It comes out to $270 million. The counties are responsible for funding that. Once they're operating, the state Office of Court Administration picks up the operating expenses. That 270 is just for the judges. If they need new courtroom space, that would be additional funding and building out that the county would be responsible for. So that is an issue that we're going to have to potentially deal with down the road. It is a lot of money. Do we have a need for more judges? We probably do. There's a lot of backup in the courts today. And actually some of the proposals in the governor's budget will add more court time for certain things. And in REM is one of those. I mean, there's going to be more time in court to deal with the new process. So not that that's a bad thing, but it's one of those things where it's kind of a sleeper. I didn't realize, counties paid capital expenses for the courts, but we do. And it's a large amount of money. So that issue's out there, and we'll see where it goes.
Okay, and again, if you have any comments, please send them our way. The next step in this process, as Ryan detailed at the beginning of this recording, is we're providing testimony to a joint committee of the state legislature on the local impact or the county impact of the governor's proposed spending plan. From there, we will be submitting 30-day amendments. We will continue to update our members along the way as we learn new things, as new things get introduced, as we talk with legislative leaders and their staffs about their priorities. Then we'll see you all at the NYSAC Legislative Conference on February 26th, 27th, and 28th. And then we will work with the legislature in their one-house budget bills. We'll analyze those as they get passed by the state assembly, by the state senate, and then we will, try to influence the process on behalf of county governments and our local taxpayers as state lawmakers and the governor negotiate the final terms of the SFY 25 state spending plan. Thank you for joining us today.